Today we're going to be working on this visual effect. Technically that is a set extension, and there's many different ways to do a set extension. For example, you can use matte paintings to bring a painting behind your subject to extend the set, to make the set bigger or than it actually was in real life. We are going to be working with Blender today, a free software you can download, and with that we're going to be extending our set so we can make something more special than just a boring street. The reason why we're going to be working with different footage is because I wanted to make this process as simple as possible. I shot in a very down angle, so we don't have to do all this rotoscoping to bring the subject actually in front of the background. So I shot from a down angle, so I had my camera on a gimbal, and basically I was like holding it up like this, like high up, and was walking with the subject just so we don't have to rotoscope anything. So all we have to do can be done in Blender. So let's go through the whole process. We need to choose our footage. I have 4 takes. I'm gonna bring them into DaVinci. I'm just gonna look out for a few things. I wanna make sure that this whole path here straight is not gonna have any cars, because I'm gonna have a plane somewhat this size, like 2 meters. I'm gonna extend it into the distance. But I'm also going to use the actual video as a material for my 3D subject, or my 3D object rather. So what I don't want is that these cars here is going to be part of my ground floor. So I'm just going to pick my shot based on that. Here also the cars would be part of the subject, so I'm not going to pick this one. I tried to go the other way around. My subject walked too far to the right, so I tried to do this one again. And I'm going to have the same issue here. So I think I'm going to go with the very first one. The very first one was the best one, so I'm just going to trim it to where the shot actually starts. Here they start walking. So I'm going to delete the other ones, and here I'm going to trim this. This is where the shot starts. They're just walking, adorable, till I have enough. Here you can see I bring the gimbal down, so I'm going to cut the shot right here. Cool. We have 10 seconds of footage. That should be enough. Now something I like to do is, before I bring it into Blender, I also do a base color correction. I'm just going to put a LUT on it for my Sony camera, just so it looks somewhat graded, because again that is going to be part of my material, and I don't like to change colors and color grading in Blender too much, so I try to do like a basic color correction inside of DaVinci. Now that that is done, I'm just going to export it, and then we're going to continue in Blender. I'm going to be working with Blender 4.3, so anything newer than that should do the trick. The first thing I always do is I save my file so nothing's gonna get lost. Now my default Blender setup might look a little different, so I'm gonna walk you through what I have here, so you can either customize it the same way, or you know where to find the things you need. So on my top right here, I have the camera view. When I look through here, you can see on my bottom view that my camera is actually moving around. This is my 3D viewport where I actually gonna be working with most. This is just a viewport so I can see. On the bottom left here, I have my shader editor. On my top left, I have my Polyhaven plugin, where I have some models and assets, but mostly the HDRIs I use all of the time. On the bottom here, I have my graph editor. Below this, I have my regular timeline, just because sometimes I use the auto keying, which is not part of my graph editor. So I just have a little bit of here if I need the, the auto keying. The one other thing we need is the motion tracking tab. You can get it by hitting the plus button, go on VFX and hit motion tracking, then you're gonna have that too. And if you want to make this your default setup, just like mine, once you're done, you can go on File, Defaults, and Save Startup File. Then every time you open your Blender file, it's gonna look like that. Also, you can see I don't have a default cube in my default setup. I have an actual 3D model, because every time I model something or I make any kind of VFX, I always need a placeholder where I can see, okay, this is the size of a human being. When I model around him, I know everything is going to be somewhat to scale, so that's always helpful. So now we need to bring our video we just rendered into Blender. So I'm going to go to my motion tracking and I open it up here, Allie video, that's the one. And now we need to track this. Since the whole camera movement is forward, we were walking forward, I always like to track those shots actually backwards, because if I track forward and I have a bunch of, keys here, they're gonna disappear out of the shot real quick. I don't want that. I want to have those keys as long as possible, so I'm gonna use the trackers. I'm gonna set in the end and track backward. But before we're gonna do that, let's go on the render settings, down on color management. Instead of view transform, I'm gonna go on standard, and the look, very high contrast. That's just gonna make it easier for Blender to identify high contrast points for the tracking. Now we're almost ready to go. The one thing we need to do is set scene frames, because now the whole timeline is going to be the length of my actual video. I could set that manually, but that way it's easier. Also, I'm going to prefetch. That loads the video into the RAM. You can see it didn't load the whole video into the RAM, only almost half. That is why I'm going to go to my edit, preferences. Under system, I'm going to scroll down. This is the memory cache limit, and this is set to 4000. I'm going to double this. Save preferences. Now when I hit prefetch again, it's going to load the whole video in it. Now when I scroll through my footage, you can see it's way faster. Now, like I said, we need to track this footage, so we're going to go to our motion model, and we're going to go through those options here, but mostly I use perspective or affine. Perspective is usually my way to go. Also, I'm going to go on the tracking settings here on the preset. Usually blurry footage or fast motion works best for me. I also like to normalize and match previous frame. Now I'm going to go to the very last frame and detect features. So now I detected a bunch of features, but I feel like that's not enough for me. So I'm going to go and detect features down here and decrease the threshold, so it's just going to give me more tracking information. One thing to keep in mind is when you track your footage, you want to track stationary objects. Anything what is moving, you don't want to track, especially your subject here. You don't want to track the dog or her. What you want to do is track everything what's not moving. So even a tree, when you have a tree or bushes in the background which might be moving through, wind or whatever, you don't want to track those things. So keep that in mind. So if you have trackers here generated automatically, you can just go ahead and delete them either one by one, like I'm doing right now, or hit the shortcut B, and you can select multiple ones at once and delete them with X. Now with A, I can select them all, and with this little button here, I can track my footage backward. And you can see most of the trackers are doing a good job doing the proper movement. Here in this graph editor, now I can see how my markers are moving. And most of them, they're gonna go in a very straight line. But you're always gonna have those outliners here. And those are a great indicator for the trackers which didn't do a good job. And what I always like to do is like those most definite ones which are definitely no good, those I'm gonna delete individually. So just click on them and hit X and delete. All the other ones seem to be doing a very good job. I see this one is like doing some funny business, but don't worry about it too much. Just if something stands out, just delete them right away. Let's just still go ahead and detect features on the very first frame. Detect features, and again, delete the ones which stand out by being on your actual subject, which is moving. You don't want that. Now you can track forward. Now let's just delete the ones which definitely don't look that great. I'm just going to delete all those outliners here. Now when we believe we have enough tracks, let's go to solve, turn on keyframe, so we don't have to select our keyframes ourselves. Focal length, optical center, and radial distortion, and solve camera motion. That process usually takes, it can take a few minutes depending on how many trackers you have in your shot. In the end, you need 8 good tracks, but right now I have probably like 30 or so, and our goal is to get a solve error of under 1 pixel, which we already have. And just to double check, I'm gonna go down here and I'm gonna look at this blue line here, and this line has to be as straight as possible because the blue line is an indicator for how good our solve is. So every time it has a little bump here, like this one is not too bad, but I know that something is going on here and that might give it a little shake in our track. So what we can do is delete bad tracks to get the solve error even lower. To me, it's not obvious which tracks might be funky. So this one is the only one which stands out, but it also could be because it's the only one far right here in the shot. So I'm just going to take a closer look at this tracker and see if he's doing a good job, and it seems fine actually, so I'm going to leave this one alone. But what I am going to do is I'm going to go in my cleanup tab, clean tracks, because that's a great way to actually delete a bunch of bad tracks at once. So I'm going to go in the reprojection error, bring this up to, let's go crazy, let's go like 6.5. okay, now I'm just going to delete those with X and solve the camera again, because there could be just a few trackers which mess with the whole solve error. But sometimes when you do that, you also ruin your entire track. Then you have to add back more trackers. So be very careful with that. Great. We brought our solve error down to 0.7, which I would be very happy with. And that's good enough for me. Now, the next step is we need to pick our origin. Usually I like to pick my origin of my world somewhere where my subject is, which is always very tricky because I usually don't have any tracks where my subject is, because those would be blocked. But this one is very close, so I'm just going to make this one my world origin by under orientation. I'm going to set origin. Now you can see something changed up here. Like the positioning of my model moved this way. Now this is our camera angle and looks like we're looking up from the ground up there, and that's obviously not right. What we want is to match the exact same camera position. The way we're going to do that, based on our origin, I'm going to select with Shift, select this one, select this one. So I'm going to select 3 markers on our floor, on our ground, and click on floor, and now we have our floor aligned. This looks better, but still a little funky, because it seems like we're way too close to the ground, because we need to tell Blender a little bit of scale information. So for example, I have to guess, in the perfect world I would have measured my set, so I know exactly from here to here it's exactly 1 meter. I didn't measure, and which is also the case very often when you just get a shot from someone and you have to do VFX on it. Nothing is always like perfectly measured, so you have to guess a lot. But for me, that looks around 1 meter, around 3 feet. So I'm just going to select one, select the other one with Shift, and now I'm going to go on set scale. Distance is on 1, which is 1 meter, set scale, and now that looks way better. Now based on our origin, this is our origin still. To double check, I just set origin again. Okay, there you go, this is our origin. Now I want to align my world with the X and Y and Z axis. So this is our origin. This here, in the distance, I want this to be my my Y axis. So we're looking into the distance. Right now we can see that when I click on this, if I look up there, he's looking either away from us or towards us. And I can just have him look away because she also looks away. So this is matching way better. The next step is we have to set up our set as the background, so our video is actually going to be the background, but also set up our tracking scene. Now it still looks like, because he would be standing right next to her and she's like way too small, rather our 3D world is way too big. So I'm going to select 2 markers again and change this number a little, set scale. It's going to make him bigger. Let's say it's maybe this is like 2 meters in distance, set scale. That looks way better. Maybe a little smaller, 1.8. Set scale. He's a little in front of her. If I bring him right next to next to her, so they basically should have the same size now. So I'm just gonna play with those numbers until they have the same size, at least more or less like this. So that looks good. If I go through my footage here, you can see that my 3D scene is perfectly tracked to my footage, and that's exactly what I want. I'm just gonna go back to a position where I believe this is where my subject is standing next to my 3D model, so somewhere here. And now I'm going to go on back to layout. That's where we were before. And now we can see all those weird dots here on the ground, but those are my tracking markers. And when I go from perfect side view, I can see that most of them, I'm just going to make them a little smaller. If you want to disable them or make them bigger or smaller, you can do that under this arrow here. Go on motion tracking, turn those on, and the size you can just make them as big or small as you want. Most of them should be very close to my green line, to my ground. Now when I go through my footage here, I can see that my model is perfectly aligned to the ground, and that's exactly what I want. Perfect. The hard part is done. Now we can go back to our color management under render. The render settings, we go back down to AGX and none. And now we can still see the video is a little transparent, which won't matter for too long, but for now it does matter. So I'm going to go click on my camera settings, make sure your pass-through is fully on, background images and opacity fully up. So now I can see the opacity full. Now when I have an object or like a subject moving like this, what I like to do is have my character I have in here, could be anything. If it's your default cube, that's fine too, but I like to animate it and animate the position rather to my subject, so that I kind of have an idea where my subject is moving in 3D space. So that's why this little auto keying is helpful. I'm just click it, hit G, and just hit left mouse click. So I just generated a keyframe. So now when I go backwards in my timeline, I can also G, Y, bring him also where she is. Now I just keep going backwards, G, Y. So I have a general idea where my subject is at all times, especially when we work in the real world, or in the 3D world rather. It doesn't have to be exact, just more or less, so I always have an idea where she is. G, Y, bring it exactly there. Now make sure to turn off auto keying, because that happens to me a lot, that I forget to turn it off, and then I make things, and then suddenly I made a bunch of keyframes and things are animated even though I didn't mean to animate those things. Anywho, now that this part is done, the idea is that we want to extend our set. The only part we're gonna keep is like the path she's walking. So part of the street is gonna stay real, and the rest is gonna be replaced with the 3D object. One thing which automatically gets created when you track your footage is, you see on the right here, we have our background selection and our foreground selection. In our background selection, we have light and ground, which we can keep the ground, which is right here, but we don't need the light necessarily, because we're going to create our own lighting. And also, I don't want this to be in the background collection just yet, so I'm just going to bring this into our foreground, delete the background, because we're going to render it all on one layer in the end. So let's start modeling our scene. This is our ground, and what you don't want to do is like move this ground away from the ground. You can see on my bottom viewport here, if I bring this up, it removes it from the ground, and if I played it now, it wouldn't be aligned with the ground anymore. Okay, so make sure to never lift it from your ground. Instead, I want to move it only on the X and Y axis. So this, I could basically rebuild our street. I don't want to rebuild the street, so I'm going to make this smaller. So I'm going to hit S, X, and make it smaller on the X axis, and then S and Y, and make it longer on the Y axis. Very, very long. As long as I need to, basically when it hits the cars back there. So now when I go back in my video, let's make our guy invisible. I want my subject here to always be covered by the ground here. So I don't see my subject right now because it's covered by the ground. If I muted the ground, you can see she's still walking underneath, because that way, once I make this here, give it the right material, she's actually going to be walking on it. So that's the magic here. Okay, right now it doesn't have any material, but if I go here on my shader editor, again, if you don't have one, make a window. You can go right click here, horizontal split, and then you're going to get another window. And this one is a shader editor. I give it a new material, and then I have my principal BSDF here. I can just add another node by holding Shift A, and I'm going to look for an image texture. It's right here. connect this into my base color. Now I'm going to open the video, Allie video, and now what I need is a texture coordinate node and a mapping node. I do that with Control T. If that doesn't happen, if you hold Control T, then you go to your preferences, add-ons, and look for the node wrangler add-on. You want to turn this on, then save your preferences under here, save preferences. Mine is on already, so I didn't have to do that. And then when you hold Control T, you get those two nodes. Now the idea is that I want to project the video from the perspective of the camera. Okay, so I'm not going to use the UV, I'm not going to use the object, I'm going to use not camera either, I'm going to use the window. So now from the window, from this upper window perspective, this is how we project our video onto this geometry. Now you can see, oops, I shouldn't have done that. So I just made the mistake to zoom in or out of this window, but since my camera is locked to the view, I have to turn this off so I can actually zoom in and out. All right, back to the material. So I want it projected from the window. Now the actual video is projected onto our geometry. When I click away, you can see that it's not perfectly the same colors or the same shape because I have this into a principled BSDF. If I connected this directly into the surface, it should look more or less the same. It doesn't fully matter, but just something to keep in mind. Right now I'm going to just keep using the principled BSDF. I might change it later. So now my plane here is, the material on it is the actual video, which is what we want. There's a few things we can adjust here. Mostly you want to auto refresh, and also the frames of the video has to match the frames of the actual video, which is 259. So now she's actually walking on 3D geometry. Like I said, make sure that stuff like that, she's getting very close to the border here. So I might have to adjust the scale a little on the x-axis to make this a little wider. So she's never like being cut off, because once we're done with the scene, none of the surroundings here is going to be still there. Everything else is going to be gone. So only this street part where she's like still in it is going to be part of the final video. So just make sure to have enough space on left and right, but also not too much. Now I also don't like that this car is a little bit in it. It probably doesn't matter if I just move it on the y-axis so the car is not in it anymore, because you can see on this view here, it's also projected from this window, which doesn't really matter. It's just a little obnoxious. It's just annoying that, you know, it's always projected from whatever view. In this here, it doesn't matter, but in the final render, it also doesn't matter, because this one matters in the final render. Just something to keep in mind. Don't be confused about why is that looking like that, because it's projected from the window, any window. If I had a different perspective, it's like from here and whatnot. You get it. Now, technically, when we go to our camera settings, on the camera here, we can turn off our video, because we don't need the rest of the video anymore. We only need whatever is projected on our geometry here. So we can just work with that one now. And now I could be building my own 3D world, whatever our heart desires. For example, I'm gonna just make a simple cube, just that you get the gist of what we can do here. Let's do like pillars like that. I'm gonna make an array, copy this on the other side, and now we can see that she's actually walking through a 3D world. So I could be building whatever I wanted here, and whatever your little heart desires, you could be making that, and she's walking through it. And that's what's called a set extension. Since pillars are a little boring, let's make something more creative. One thing I forgot to mention is, like, make sure, because the ground, if you did all the materials on your ground layer, which was automatically created, go under your object settings, under visibility, and turn off shadow catcher, because usually what you want to do is just using this ground as a shadow catcher, but in this particular case we actually want to show the ground. So make sure to actually turn off the shadow catcher so you can actually see it, and then build your environment like that. And that's what I came up with. So as you can see, I have like this huge mountainside. I just have one 3D scan of a mountainside, and I basically just made instances, copy pasted them all over the place. Let me mute my volume cube. Yeah, that's basically what it looks like. And then what I just removed is a volume cube to add a little bit of, you know, haze, you know, atmosphere, which happens when you like look far into the distance. Then you see, you know, haze and stuff. Yeah, so it is a fairly simple scene because I had this asset. I have this asset from Blender Kit. So if you want to redo the same scene, you can use yeah, Blender Kit for like assets if you don't want to model anything yourself. But it's really up to you. You can be as creative as you want once you have the foundation of the track and the footage onto your plane. As you can see, I created some imperfections into my plane, so it's not like just like a perfectly straight path, you know, but it's really up to you. Do whatever you want. If you end up using my footage, please do me the favor, tag me, of course, so I can see it, but also tag Allie normally, because she was nice enough to be part of this video. So thank you so much for watching, and if you have any questions, please let me know in the comments below, and see you in the next video. Toodaloo.